This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Good morning and welcome to the Monday Morning Break with me, Marie. And this morning I'm going to be talking to Michael, who's made the move from primary teaching into special further education. So we'll be talking about the differences between that.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
So good morning, everyone, and I hope you're all okay on this Monday morning. It was a very hot weekend where we are here, so I hope everyone has some nice time in the sunshine and feeling relaxed and ready to go on this Monday morning. So as I said, the title of today's show is Making the Move, and I'm joined by Michael here. Good morning, Michael.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, you're very welcome. So Michael was a primary school teacher for 5 years, and you've also previously taught in Japan for 10 years, and you've now made the move into specialist further education sector, teaching post-16 students. So I think there's been a lot recently, and I know there's been some other Teachers Talk Radio shows about the recruitment and retention difficulties at the moment. And I know when we've done our latest recruitment, we have started to look at what sort of transferable skills and actually sort of explicitly sort of target people and say, look, you might be in primary, junior, secondary, but some of your skills are going to be very transferable to different sectors. Have you considered it? So yeah, really interesting, and I'm really interested to talk about your different experiences, Michael, and hear about them. So yeah, welcome.
Thank you very much.
So could we start with, can you tell me a bit about your previous jobs?
Absolutely. I started off teaching in Japan, actually, completely on a whim, really. Some friends of mine also went to Japan to teach English, and they basically persuaded me to join them, seeing as I wasn't really doing much after university myself. I went out there. And then
Wow.
I spent about 10 years in total there.
So that's a long whim.
Yeah, exactly. It turned into a very long whim. And it was a great experience, obviously, and very enjoyable, very fun. And then I think I had a CELTA, which is a certificate in English language teaching to adults, which was one teaching qualification. But after a few years, I just decided that I really wanted to get fully qualified, basically.
Yeah.
Mainly just for personal satisfaction for one reason, and I also wanted to experience working in a real school environment and a primary school, and I also wanted to give my family a bit of experience of life in England.
Yeah.
So at that time I had 2 children, and I thought it would be useful if they had a variety of experience of England and Japan, and they could decide where they wanted to end up in the future. But I didn't want to say limit them to necessarily life in Japan. So there were a variety of reasons, and then I came back and did a PGCE, and then started working in primary school.
So I mean, that move in itself must have been very, very different.
Yes.
Yeah. So from going teaching adults in Japan to then coming back to England after 10 years, and then going into teaching primary. So yeah, big differences, I imagine.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. Actually, the first school that I worked for in Japan, it was a conversation school, and we actually taught people from 2 years up to I think the oldest one was probably about 80. Also,
Oh,
so
wow.
I did actually teach a lot of children up there as well. Although, to be perfectly honest, the lessons there were but very well loosely described as lessons. To be honest, I would say, mainly because not many people really had training from the school or previously in how to teach children.
Yeah.
But everyone enjoyed them and did their best. But we did have a lot of experience teaching children. And then I also did some part-time work for another school, which was mainly focused on children. So I did actually have quite a lot of experience teaching, or supposedly teaching children in Japan.
Yes. Yeah.
And then coming back, there was quite a similar style of teaching in a way, because when you teach English, you have to use so many interesting kind of teaching techniques in terms of coming up with a variety of ideas and well, almost a very similar style of teaching to primary, where you have to really interest people in the subject, and you find an interesting topic and then lead into the teaching point from there, instead of secondary, which might be bang straight into the teaching, and you don't have to give them so much warning. You expect a lot more in terms of, say, the learner's preparation. Whereas in primary, I think teach English, there's a lot more subtle manoeuvring them in.
That's a very interesting point, actually. Yeah, the differences between the sort of primary and the secondary, like you said, the expectations are perhaps different. Was there any, is there any sort of culturally, I guess? So did you find that when you were used to teaching, in Japan, and then obviously coming to England and the UK, was there anything? Did the cultural differences, perhaps, or the values, did that make a difference in the classroom that you noticed?
I think probably the biggest difference was mainly just that Japanese people, or in general, the culture is more leader-led, and if you're a learner or a student, then you're not really expected to take part as much as just do what you're told, basically. So that could lead to problems in the classroom in Japan, because you expected more of them as learners, and you would quite often not get any response, but mainly because they were just expecting a different style of teaching, and not necessarily expecting to almost be seen on the same level as the teacher. So you could quite often ask a question in the classroom, and no one at all would respond or put their hand up, which actually was much easier back in England, when you would ask a question and 10 hands would go up, or you couldn't stop them talking. Actually, probably more of a problem than no one talking.
That's really interesting, actually. So I guess linking back to what you said as well about the sort of loosely teaching, perhaps there was slight sort of lack of curriculum. I mean, did it fall a lot to you to kind of come up with the lessons to teach to them, or?
No, that's a really good question. I think we did have a curriculum. We actually had a textbook, I think, but it only really contained one lesson, or one page of a lesson, which we were expected to teach each lesson to the children. And that was quite a dry page, and the children were, say, 5 years old and expected to supposedly fill in this work in English, where they couldn't even write in Japanese yet, let alone write in a foreign language.
Of course.
There was quite a strange difference in expectations from what the children's actual level was, and the school I worked for's expectations. So a lot of lessons ended up with well, to be fair, as I said, people did try their best. I remember not knowing exactly what I was supposed to be doing. Sometimes we ended up throwing the ball around and catching it, and just asking warm-up questions like, how old are you, and where do you live, and so on and so on. And then I remember, I think a teacher covered my class one day, and they said, the children were incredibly fluent in English, which was completely different to what I was actually supposed to be doing, but at the same time got them talking English, ironically. So it was a very, very strange school, to be honest.
I mean, I bet there are so many sort of memories and experience.
Exactly.
I mean, over 10 years as well. So obviously you had your life over in Japan, and you had your children. And then, as you said, you then thought that to give your children the best, the experiences of both of their heritages and the, cultures, that you would come over, you'd make the move back over to England, which must have been a huge move. And did you have? I'm quite interested. Obviously, you are, British,
Yes.
but was it a bit of a culture shock coming back over? Did you see a lot of changes in the UK?
I wouldn't say it was so much a culture shock. It was more the fact that you're almost picking something up from 10 years previously. And of course, things have changed. And,
Yeah.
and all of your reference points are not necessarily there anymore. That was the other thing. I think culturally, I felt really normal, and if anything, more comfortable whenever I was back in England.
Yeah.
But I think it was more after 10 years, you realise that talking about something that happened, obviously 10 years prior, just was not relevant to anyone else anymore.
Yeah,
and even things like, I remember, I think, after a few years of being in Japan, I heard something about the current winner of Britain's Got Talent or something. And I remember thinking, oh, actually, I don't know these people at all. And just so small things like that would be so second nature that everyone would know when you start talking about it in England. And yet you realise, oh, actually, I don't know some of these things anymore. And after 10 years, it's quite it is a long time. And I mean, some people's times, obviously, almost. So it's longer than you think. Even though you, at the same time, you funnily think that you do still know everything, but you don't.
Yeah, you're just 10 years out of date.
Exactly. Yeah.
So then we're, you're back in the UK, and like you said, you wanted to carry on teaching. Yes. So you did your PGCE, and then began working in a primary school as a teacher. Right. So mainstream primary school.
Yes, it was a mainstream primary school.
And so how many people? How many pupils did you sort of have in your class at that point?
30. Usually.
30, yes. Right. So you're going straight in with how old?
8, 9.
8, 9. So So come back from Japan straight into after your teacher training and have gone into a class of 30 8 to 9-year-olds. And you did that for 5 years.
Yes. That's right. Yeah.
And then you made another move, which is very, very different again. So can you tell us a little bit about what you do now?
Well, now I work in a specialist further education college, and help people who all have EHCPs. And the groups are obviously much smaller than having 30 people in a class. But going back to what I said before about the work in Japan, it's interestingly, again, quite similar, I think, compared to primary teaching, and more similar probably, which might be surprising, more similar than, say, coming from a secondary education setting, which is, in a sense, the same age of student, but the way to teach them is very, very different. Yes. Whereas I think primary is actually quite similar to how we teach them, and use their own interests to. So not all the time, but quite often use the learner's interests to help teach them and help them learn what they want to learn. There's a wide range of subject that we teach here, again, depending on the learner. So some people might want to learn about flags in geography, for example, or even want to learn Mongolian or Japanese, which I can help them with.
Yeah.
My main official responsibilities are head of maths and head of behaviour, but that's not all that I do. And sometimes, again, depending on the learner, it can be very student led, and if they want to branch out into a different activity, then we can. There's a very fluid and open curriculum, which is something that I really enjoy, and being able to pick something up which you or the learner or someone else might have inspiration for that day all of a sudden. And I really enjoy that. There's no feeling ever that you wake up and you think, oh, I'm going to have to do this today, which I think most people probably get in most jobs, and it's very inspiring and invigorating. Although, having said that, it's I think we might come on to this later, but some people might think they would enjoy that, but not necessarily would. And I think it does require a certain type of person to actually want to do that and actually enjoy it.
Probably someone that's open to lots of changes.
Yeah, absolutely. Precisely,
and goes to Japan on a whim.
Precisely, yeah, exactly.
It's made me, that just you saying that actually, it's made me think back to what you were saying about those kind of lessons in Japan where you, with the children, where you might just start sort of ad-libbing almost and throwing the ball and having a conversation that way. And I imagine you can bring in a lot of those sort of thinking on your feet skills, and a quick change of obviously this lesson pattern is not going to work today.
Yeah,
So what
absolutely.
can we do?
Yeah.
So you've also changed subjects, I notice, haven't you? So you've gone from English
Yes.
to maths.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, that's true. That's true. But I do still teach English,
Yes.
and I do still enjoy teaching English. I did actually really enjoy maths up until the end of my GCSEs,
Right.
and I was, to be fair, at that time I was reasonably good at it, and I got an A at that time. There was no.
I think that's better than reasonably good.
It was okay, and I did it a year earlier as well.
That is more than okay.
But apart from that, I did enjoy maths at that stage. But then I did AO level maths, and I still remember the very first question on my AO level maths exam, which at that time was a branch between GCSE and A level,
Right.
which I don't think is done anymore. But I remember the first question on the exam was the fact that last year, I think something like 10% of people failed this exam, and then the question moved on and was related to percentages, and myself and a friend thought, well, we will be one of those 10% this year.
That was the very first question on the exam. It said last year 10% of people
yes.
My gosh.
But to be honest, it didn't really bother me because it was just an extra qualification to potentially get. It was done when I was in now year 11, but it didn't really matter, and I did actually end up getting an E, which I was actually quite surprised and pleased with.
But what a way to start an exam. I mean, thank goodness. I hope we don't, that those maths A levels aren't like that now, because that would be that would absolutely terrify me.
No, it's not the best way to
it's not.
An exam.
No, just put the fear of God into you.
That was the 90s.
That was the 90s. Well, okay. So, I mean, this is just absolutely fascinating to me. I mean, talking about kind of big career changes, completely different ways of working, and who you're working with, but all within education. So, I mean, can you sort of say what are the main differences? And I mean, that's a big question, I know, but any sort of differences that you've noticed?
I think the obvious ones, mainly, obviously, the age of the learners is quite different. Here, the average age is probably about 18 or 19, whereas, of course, in primary school, it's 7 to 11 for me. The groups are much smaller here. The maximum is probably about 4 or 5. So it's not very, very often it's 1-to-1. So, of course, it's different. And the curriculum is, as I mentioned, more fluid, but still it's quite similar in lots of ways to the primary curriculum, in the sense that we cover all the subjects. And I try to teach maths, English, but often we also go into geography, history, science, depending on the lesson. So those are the main obvious differences. But again, by the same token, there are actually some similarities in those. Obviously, a lot of the subjects are similar to primary school. I think it's quite similar to what I liked in primary school quite often also, which was going into smaller groups and teaching them slightly more personally, instead of teaching a large group of 30 people.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting, I think that as well. And that's something that we certainly picked up on, in terms of our recruitment, and sort of almost saying to people, these skills that you have from primary teaching and junior teaching are actually very applicable in a specialist SEN post-16 setting, because, I mean, certainly, some students at that age as well, they have got big gaps, haven't they?
Yes.
I mean, things like telling the time, and times tables, and tying your shoelaces and things like that. If you've missed, for whatever reason, you've missed sort of learning that at that age, and then you're now sort of 18 and you think, maybe there's no point learning it now, or there's some embarrassment of, I don't know how to do this. So all those skills that, maybe from primary and teaching, things like that, can come through in specialist further education. And like you said as well, that just the breadth of the curriculum, I imagine that must be, I hope. I mean, it sounds to me like it would be quite refreshing, and quite interesting after perhaps teaching, one subject all the time, and then just having this bit of variety of, actually, well, today we're doing geography, and this afternoon I'm going to do some English with this group, and
and like you mentioned, sorry about shoelaces, but also very importantly here is the life skills and wellbeing curriculum also, which is exactly as you were saying. A lot of people would come to the age of 18 and not be able to possibly actually. I think there are some people exactly like you say who actually don't know how to tie their shoelaces or make their bed, and I think that was our life skills and wellbeing week. I think a lot of learners said it was the most enjoyable and interesting and useful week they could imagine. It was amazing. And also, I remember seeing a few people who I thought might not be that comfortable, but actually really, really enjoyed it, appreciated, and got into it much more than I possibly thought they would. But they really found it useful, learning how to perform these life skills, which they're just not really very used to.
Which that's amazing, isn't it? I think that's ultimately what any teacher at any age of any class of any subject, you just want to see your students or your pupils loving what you're doing and energized, enjoying it, engaging with it, and learning new skills. And like I said, whatever age group that is and whatever the subject is, that's kind of what you want. This is so interesting. I'm just finding, I knew your life was quite varied, but I'm loving hearing about it and kind of how you've arrived at where you are now. But what we'll do, we'll go into the news. If anyone who's listening's got any questions for Michael, then please feel free to message into the show, and we will pick up on this after the news. I'll just scroll down on my Oh, there we go. I thought you were going to have to do the news for a moment then, Michael, as well.
No problem.
Yeah.
Just another day.
Just another day, exactly. Oh, gosh, sorry, everyone. The news is coming. Right.
It's time for a fresh start to language learning. Pearson Edexcel's new student-centred French, German and Spanish 2024 GCSEs cater to the needs of all learners, regardless of their background, ability or reason for studying. Rooted in learned language knowledge, their assessments are transparent and accessible, allowing all students to showcase their language skills. Through inclusive and relatable content, the new Pearson Edexcel MFL GCSEs build a shared cultural capital that helps students develop an understanding of and appreciation for the wider world. Find out more at go.pearson.com/MFL GCSE 24.
This programme has been brought to you by the Happy Confident Company. Our clinically approved, ready-to-go wellbeing and mental health programme will help your pupils thrive. In only 10 minutes a day, you'll be able to deliver social and emotional learning and wellbeing tools throughout your school. To find out more, visit us at www.happyconfident.com.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
The Universities and Colleges Employers Association, UCEA, is playing down the impact a marking boycott is having on students. This is the view of the University and College Union, according to a report on the BBC. The UCEA represents 144 institutions and has released a survey which suggests most student graduations are not being affected by the boycott. This is contrary to the UCU view that this survey accounts for fewer than half of universities. Some students have graduated without their final marks, whilst others have seen graduations delayed. The boycott is part of a long-running dispute over pay and conditions, which has been previously reported on Teachers Talk Radio News. Many students have complained about the lack of communication around the impact of the boycott from their universities, whilst others highlight the fact that it is coming at the end of an already fragmented experience of university brought about by the impact of the pandemic. Whilst the UCEA survey suggests that the impact on students is different in each university, its chief was keen to say it showed that the majority of students were not facing a graduation without their final marks, although Raj Jethwa was quick to point out that this would be little comfort to those who were affected. The industrial action in the higher education sector is just part of a wider action being taken by those in education. But Sky News and other outlets report that PM Rishi Sunak, could be considering a block on recommendations by peer review bodies from across the public sector. The teaching peer review body presented its recommendations to ministers, and it is expected to be published next month. Leaked reports suggest it could be a proposal of 6.5%. Government sources deny the claims made originally in the Times, but stated that pumping money into the economy risks fueling inflation. In an editorial in The Guardian, recruitment and retention problems were highlighted again, with some alarming figures suggesting that 1 in 4 new teachers leave the profession within 3 years. The piece goes on to cite the huge range of issues that schools deal with, including sexual harassment and bullying, as well as home circumstances and their effects. This view was further emphasised this week with a report from The Observer focusing on the stresses being placed on pupil referral units. The units cater for children who have been excluded from mainstream schools. But leaders are now saying they are full to bursting because of unprecedented levels of behaviour incidents in schools. Data suggests that permanent exclusions are rising after a brief lull on the return to school after the pandemic. The former Children's Commissioner Anne Longfield says in the report that schools are buckling under the pressure of children with complex needs, and cites cuts to public services, leaving a lack of support in its wake. She called the situation a disaster for vulnerable children. A former head teacher of a PRU in Stockton-on-Tees said she had dealt with children spitting, kicking and swearing. Her school had previously tried to take children on short outreach programmes, but now this was impossible due to overload. Finally, the BBC features calls by EastEnders actress Rose Ayling-Ellis for sign language lessons to be made freely available to those who need them, including parents and carers of deaf children. The British Sign Language user says she cannot believe that some parents and guardians of deaf children have to pay for tuition. The cost of an accredited course can be anywhere between £200 and £700. Martin McLean, Senior Policy Advisor at the National Deaf Children's Society, says funding is inconsistent and a postcode lottery, with some local authorities funding it whilst others don't. Spokesmen for leaders across all 4 home nations have made statements in support of improving access to BSL, but only the Welsh Government says it is already included in the curriculum for schools. In 2022, the British Sign Language Bill was passed, recognising BSL as an official language, and the Department for Education in England says it is working towards a BSL GCSE, which should be available from September 2025. A spokesperson for the Scottish Government has said that its teaching council is working with the University of Edinburgh on the development of an undergraduate degree in primary education and BSL. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Fox.
This is 2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello, this week I'm going to discuss tech that will help you battle one of the worst things that can possibly happen in school, the summer. Nothing is worse than melting all day while trying to deliver lessons, yet we all have to suffer it. Let's see what tech has to offer you. Through searching the web, I found a few cool gadgets, pun totally intended. Starting with the cheapest, a neck fan. It looks like an 80s pair of headphones around your neck. Rechargeable with different speed settings. It's got some decent reviews, and at £14 may be worth a try. Although high settings have more noise, so it might not be great for quiet times. For £20 you can get a personal air cooler. This has a tank of water, so not only fans you, but uses the water to super cool the air. Nice. £29 gets you a waist fan. Clip it onto your belt, or use the belt supplied and it blows up your shirt. Again, rechargeable, and you can choose a front or back position. As with the previous though, noise may be a problem. Next, staying with the fan idea, for £79 you can get a cooling vest. This is a vest filled with fans, not unlike those you see on novelty inflatable fancy dress suits. The fans pass cool air over you and you stay cool. Again, noise is a factor here though. If you're willing to splash out for £100, how about a cooling vest with elements instead? Basically, it looks like an FBI bulletproof vest you see on TV, filled with reusable ice packs. It's obviously very quiet, however, will make squeezing through tight spaces a little more difficult. Also, preparation is needed as the packs will need to be frozen overnight. In conclusion, fans are the cheapest way to go, and you look like you're standing in hero wind, but noise is a factor. Vests may keep you cool, but you certainly will not look it. I suppose you could always try sticking an ice pack in a plastic bag and putting it in your pocket. What do you do to stay cool? Let us know at TT Radio Official. I'm Steve Woods, and that was 2 Minute Tech.
2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
Right, just turning my volume back up again. Right, welcome back. And I always love the 2 Minute Tech. I always get lots of ideas, and I've literally just written down the one about the personal air cooler. I mean, for £20, that sounds actually really good. I wasn't too sure about the others, particularly the one I was just imagining us all with the fans blowing up your shirts and looking like you're wearing an FBI vest. But yeah, always love Steve's 2 Minute Tech. So we do, we prepared a while ago actually for the heat wave or the hot weather coming, because it does cause a lot of issues. I mean, the far-reaching issues actually that are beyond kind of somebody getting a bit hot and bothered. There's the sort of the sensory issues, the regulation as well. I mean, I think a lot of our students find it difficult to regulate their own temperatures anyway, and they can be very overwhelming to be hot as well. And then of course as well there's all the issues with sort of dysphoria or people not wanting to wear t-shirts for many reasons, and that, so you've got to actually be sort of very careful of the more those that are still wearing coats and hoodies and things like that. So we actually had one of our students write a guide for everyone staying cool, and we've brought in things like sort of buckets so you could put in cold water under the table, and lots of ice lollies and things like that. And the misting fans, they're quite good because they're quite cheap. I think you can get them from various places for not very much money at all. A little hand fan that you can mist through. But yeah, I think there's a lot of issues with the heat beyond heat stroke maybe or sunburn, isn't there? Yeah. So while we were listening to the news, we were just talking about the news story, weren't we, Michael? You were saying you'd read it this morning. Very relevant actually to what we're talking about. If they're saying this retention crisis continues with 1 in 4 new teachers leaving within 3 years, I mean that's a very short amount of time, isn't it? There's something not going well there, I think. No. But yeah, you were saying what you'd read, Michael, as well.
I just heard that I think it was the number of art teachers is down by 40 or 50% in the last 10 years or so.
Wow. That's at secondary. Is that secondary age? Yes. Yeah. So again, I guess it kind of links with what we're saying. You can definitely make the move. You can move within the sectors because, I mean, if you were a primary school, I mean, chances are you've done art, exactly. Or you've done creative things, and there's perhaps thinking about moving older, or if you were got all these skills in different subjects, moving to younger ages would work. I mean, I was really interested in this the part when they were talking about the stress on the PRUs, on the pupil referral units, and the behaviour incidents are rising, permanent exclusion figures are rising. I think the view on, or certainly the stories and the reports on behaviour within schools is really difficult to hear, isn't it? I think it must be incredibly difficult to handle, and I can't imagine the stress of having to deal with that day in, day out. And also what that this how things are is a disaster for vulnerable children at the moment. I mean, I think it absolutely stands that things need to change, don't they?
Yeah, definitely.
it's interesting. We were talking before, weren't we, about the kind of emotional as well, so that life skills and well-being. A little semi promo here for the other Teachers Talk radio shows. But I listened last night, actually, well, yesterday afternoon. I listened to Tom Rogers and Poppy Gibson's one with the Happy Confident company, and it was absolutely brilliant. I mean, I did tweet, and I'm definitely going to go and look at their resources. But they are talking about well, the thing was that mental health is used to be a thing to have in school, but now it's a must have. Like, you must be doing it and teaching. And yeah, I think you'd be interested in these ones, Michael. The cards, they're the feel good. Feelings cards, and there's a game you can play. Anyway, we'll probably talk about that later on. But yeah, I think it's teaching emotional well-being and emotional regulation and all of that. I think it runs through all the ages, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
So if you've got experience of teaching it to younger children, you can transfer that up, can't you, to older. Sorry, I've got to tell you all as well. We've got one of our lovely students here, Connor, is on the chat, and he is looking out for the weather for us. So links in with the 2-minute tech about keeping cool. So Connor, thank you very much. You've looked up for everyone that it should be about 20 degrees today. So that's a little bit cooler, isn't it? So which I'm sure people will be glad to hear. So Connor, thank you for looking that up. And if you've got any more weather reports, I'm sure the listeners would love to hear that. So Michael, if we just go back to what we were talking about, and what made you want to move? So we've said, you've said about Japan, and you wanted your children to experience life in the UK as well, so that I think you said so they can make their own decisions when they're older. But what made you want to move then from primary school teaching?
There wasn't initially anything that really made me want to move from primary school teaching. I think I'd been teaching year 4 for a few years, which it was just I just wanted a bit of a change in sense from that in the first place. And there wasn't necessarily a possibility of doing that in the school I was at, so I just started looking around slightly. There were a few things, as I mentioned previously. I like working in smaller groups, so that was something that could have attracted me in another setting as well, and teaching one-to-one sometimes and forming closer personal relationships, which was quite attractive. But it was more when I started looking for inclusion specifically, I was actually very impressed with the job advertisement. And
okay, good to know.
I really think it is. It was very descriptive, detailed, attractive, and explained what life would be like, and contained elements of things that we've been alluding to or mentioning just now in terms of frustration of teachers in the system. And I remember the advertisement did say that we're a place that genuinely does care about people's mental health and its staff and looks after their well-being. And it was so specifically and obviously personally written, as opposed to copy and pasted from somewhere.
Yeah.
So I could tell that somebody actually taken the time to write it as opposed to taking it from else. So it was a very, I think, personally written advertisement. And the role itself sounded so interesting and exciting too. Very similar to the role itself that I've described, but teaching lots of different subjects, not only maths and English, but also history, art, geography, whatever might come up. And also, I remember it mentioned the music room specifically.
Yes.
And it said that there was a specific dedicated music teacher and music room, I think, as well, which is very interesting and attractive to me, because I used to, years ago, I tried to play the guitar for a long time. But I was very into it. So it was something that did seem just incredibly exciting, and the whole situation just seemed very attractive with all the different strands of curriculum and subject you could teach, plus the life skills and well-being, and the as I mentioned, looking after staff, and the fact that it was so personally written, and it was just a very interesting and exciting sounding position, basically.
That's great. That's great. I'm so glad to hear that. I mean, I think it maybe it all lined up, didn't it? It all aligned. You
Absolutely.
were potentially looking to slightly change what you were doing,
Exactly.
but no sort of real thoughts of specifically moving to post 16. But
Right.
it just happened you were
It
looking,
just
and
fell
then
in my lap, really.
yeah, it fell in your lap. Well,
Yeah.
it's meant to be,
It
wasn't
was.
it? Which I find really interesting, because I feel like I didn't actually ever ask you at the time. This is a change, primary to post 16, and why? I don't think that I ever asked you that, so it's quite
Okay.
interesting to hear. And yeah, it's really nice to hear your feedback actually about the advert, because yeah, that is absolutely what I wanted to achieve with it. It is focused on, and I think we did say, you will not have to mark. You will not have to take
Yeah.
marking home, and so on and so on, and give people examples, which again, Tom and Poppy, I'm going to link to your show again. Poppy was talking about well-being washing. Have you
Okay.
heard of this? So it's a bit like, I think she gave the other examples, it's a bit like pride washing, where companies will, put the pride logo on their emails,
Okay.
and they'll do it for the month. And then it's like, right, that's the end of Pride
Okay.
Month, right, take it off with,
Right.
we're not doing Pride anymore. And well-being washing is similar in that people, businesses or organisations or schools might be saying, yes, we really care about well-being, but it's all very tokenistic, and
Exactly
it's
the word I was going to use.
yeah, it's not
Yes.
embedded, and it's a bit like, well, what does that mean? And I think that's something that we try to do of what specifics. So we
Definitely.
care about your well-being, and that means this,
Yes.
and so on, with staff and students.
Yes.
But yeah, so this is, I mean, how lucky are we that this all just seemed to work out?
The stars aligned.
Yeah, the stars aligned, and you were looking for a job, and then you thought, oh, that all sounds good, and it's got music. I am interested. Have you ever done guitar here?
No. but
No.
funnily-
Okay. Right.
Funnily, I did get roped in to play the bass, though.
Yeah. And did you enjoy it?
I did, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And there is a recording somewhere of that performance.
Right, I'm going to have to ask about that. Or you have to go in the music room more. So what advice would you give others thinking about moving age group or type of provision, or any of those things, or even, I guess, even countries?
Yeah.
So what advice have you got for all of those things?
Okay. Well, for country, I was quite lucky, to be honest, because coincidentally, when I was at school, there were lots of Japanese children at my school. So I already had quite a
Okay, right.
firm basis and a support group and network when I got to Japan. So it wasn't, even though making the decision itself to go was almost pretty much on a whim, I did have that support network, which made it not such a thought process to have to go through. I knew that I would have friends there.
Yeah, I guess that's a big one,
Yeah,
actually,
it
because I
was.
can't imagine just suddenly going, right, I'm going to move to a different country.
No. And I saw some other people who joined my school who did suffer mainly from not knowing people.
Yeah.
And even though there were lots of in the area, it still takes time to make friends, and in those first few months it can be tough.
Yeah.
But if people are interested in doing something after university, it's certainly a great activity to do, I think. Just if you do have any different career plans, make sure you do go back to wherever you're from and actually fulfill those instead of staying somewhere for 10 years or something.
Well, it seems to have worked out very well for you.
Absolutely, yeah.
Still laughing at the 10-year whim.
Yeah. I remember saying to someone, a good friend of mine I still know now, an Australian called Kevin, I remember walking to the supermarket with him on my second day and telling him that I would be there about 6 months and then be back in England in July. And he never let me forget that for the following 4 years.
It's brilliant. It's brilliant.
It was my intention. Things happen.
Well, exactly. Things happen, and you obviously went with the flow.
Yeah, absolutely. And
had an amazing 10 years.
Yeah, yes. And also, you did have to be a teacher. My friends were working on something called the JET program, which is still going, teaching English in secondary schools or also primary schools in Japan. Whereas I worked for a private language school, but that actually wasn't the reason I went there. It was more, as I said, on a whim something to do after university, and I hadn't thought too much about it. And then actually just found that I did enjoy the teaching, and which didn't. Actually, that doesn't surprise me. I just never really thought about it in terms of what skills I probably did know I had if I'd thought about it. But to be honest, at that age, I wasn't too much into that kind of self-analysis. But
so it wasn't even that you went over to be an English teacher. You went over there and then went, oh, hold on, I could do that. Oh, I quite like this.
Yes, in a sense, I did sort out the job beforehand in England. But in terms of actually thinking about what it would really entail, then I hadn't really thought too much. And I remember in the interview in London, the interviewer gave me a textbook of theirs and said, after reading this text, what would you do after that? And I remember saying, completely honestly, I have no idea. And I told her that I really didn't understand her question, and actually I think the language school liked that, because they wanted you to teach according to their prescribed style, which they didn't actually hire. A friend of mine a few years later who'd actually already been in Japan and been a teacher, and they didn't hire him, I think, because they knew that he taught in a different system, so they didn't like people who were actually skilled teachers, because they might actually
deviate from their textbooks.
Exactly. It was kind of like a lesson plan which they could almost sell to make it like a standard lesson in a sense. And if anyone did deviate from the norm, then if someone had a different style of lesson, they would realize that the average kind of lesson was actually not really amazing. So I think it was actually quite a commonsensical business model.
Yes.
But it is quite funny when you hear about some of the practices, which I could go on for hours about.
We'll see how much time we've got when we finish going through the questions that we've got. I've lost track of where we were now. Advice, right? Advice. So you've done advice for perhaps moving countries is
right.
It was helpful to you to kind of have a job lined up and to have a network.
Absolutely.
That's made it much easier for you. And perhaps if you're going to have a bit of a plan and a rough idea of when you're coming back, but that could be with a degree. That could be with a degrry of flexibility. You can always, expand it. Exactly. And okay. I mean, what an amazing experience. And I think for whatever else, you just went and did it. And like you said, you were 18, perhaps didn't have that career plan in mind, but you went and did it, and then came back and continued your teaching career.
Yes. And obviously, I think that the change from primary to my current role is obviously more serious in terms of what you're going into. I think you really do need to understand exactly what it is going to entail, because I think it's very easy to think it can sound interesting and amazing, but if you don't necessarily know completely what you will be doing, then I think some people might get a slight shock and think maybe if they read a job description, they might think they could do that, but unless you've actually experienced it, it's very hard to describe exactly what it will actually entail.
Yeah, totally agree. I think that's something that's happened, certainly happened at other provisions as well. I mean, there are teachers that are unhappy and very stressed in the mainstream system, and then I guess could read this either alternative provision or specialist provision or a different sector, and then think, oh my gosh, that sounds amazing, sounds like a dream. Exactly. And then if you are not informed, just get a real shock.
Exactly.
Because it is different, but there are still very high expectations, albeit they might be coming from a different source.
Absolutely.
And it's not always an easy job,
no.
Is it?
No.
So great tip. So actually making sure don't just go, oh my god, that sounds amazing, and kind of fully throw yourself into it without finding a bit more. So maybe visiting the place and
definitely.
Speaking to people that work in that sector for an honest opinion, I suppose, and having a good look around, I guess.
And also I would say think about how you actually are as a person, and maybe think about why you do want to move. So, say if
Yeah.
you're in secondary education, think about really why you want to move.
Mm.
And of course, I and everyone completely understands a lot of the frustrations
Yeah.
secondary teachers, especially, I would say, probably have at the moment.
Mm.
But at the same time, it's obviously a shame that there are some of these stresses, and there's a lot of data-driven practices.
Yeah.
And some of the practices I've heard about, especially in secondary schools, maybe are not overly welcoming. But at the same time, just because that model doesn't work, it doesn't mean that if the model maybe that it should be was working, then you would actually want to work in a secondary school.
Yes.
So just because it's not working doesn't mean you actually necessarily want to move.
Yeah.
You just maybe should try and, or if we could, we would ideally change that system. But
Yeah.
it doesn't necessarily mean that you actually want to work in a different sector necessarily. So
Yeah.
you've got to understand exactly where you want to be. I've got some friends who have made similar moves to alternative education providers, and they haven't actually enjoyed it too much.
Really?
Because I think what they actually wanted to do was stay in secondary, but hopefully in a different system.
Yeah. Or perhaps
So-
even in a different school.
Oh,
There's that thing, isn't
absolutely.
there? If you're in a
Definitely.
school, and unfortunately, some schools can be incredibly difficult to work with, whether that's culture, the sorts of toxic culture, or for whatever reason. And I quite often see this on Twitter as well, of people feeling driven to leave the profession, and a lot of people always say, don't stay at a school that makes you
Absolutely.
unhappy. And it might be, like I said, it might be a different school rather than
Yes.
a complete different age group or
Absolutely.
sector. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, so I think that's really true. I guess that's the same with anything, isn't it? If you change anything, just have a real think, like, why?
Yes.
Why do I want to?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And like quite often, it's the school itself, the
Mm,
particular school that you're working in. Just like any job in any industry, you wouldn't say that one office was the same as another office. It could be completely
Yeah.
more welcoming or just completely different. So, and it's the same with schools. It's not necessarily the system itself that you're working in. It's just the school possibly. So yeah, absolutely.
yeah, definitely. So I said, when we were preparing, I said, I'd like to ask you if there are any disadvantages,
Yes.
and that you can be completely
Yes,
honest
yes.
about it, despite
Yep.
despite
Yeah.
me sitting next to you.
Well, nothing to worry about.
So disadvantages.
No, it's honestly the first thing I put down was just that it's hard to describe. Well, first of all, it's hard to describe because I think any disadvantages are just part of the job, which
Yes, that's it. Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's not something extra on the side. It's just
The nature of the
the
role.
nature of the role
Yeah,
itself, which and
yeah.
I wouldn't really describe that as a disadvantage necessarily. I think that possibly the hardest part is sometimes when some of the stories that you can hear from students, because they can have tough home lives or be in difficult situations themselves. That's probably the hardest part, and that can be emotionally, it can be very, very up and down. I remember to you last year, sometimes you can go from one situation which is very, very happy because you're with one person, and then the next session might be the complete opposite,
Yes.
just depending on people's situations and emotional states and so on and so on.
Yeah.
But again, I wouldn't exactly describe that as a disadvantage, because I think that's just part of the job, and so as long as you're aware of that, and if you are aware of things like this, then you can prepare yourself, be mentally ready for them, and remain on a more emotional, even keel yourself, and deal with it just very professionally.
Yeah.
And not get too involved, or of course you care about them, but at the same time understand that you just can't get too emotionally involved, otherwise you become a wreck yourself almost.
That's it. Exactly. You can't take it all on.
No.
You've got to learn to, I mean, I call it compartmentalizing, I guess, isn't it? You've got to have those strategies so that you're not going home and you've taken in everything, and you're still carrying it and hurting, I guess, sometimes, for them.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I think it was really interesting, your conversation about how you can go from one session, and people are in a good place, your students are in a good place, they might be perhaps a little bit further along in progression, and you've got a very sort of lively, engaging session, which in itself can take, it's tiring.
That can be tiring itself,
yeah.
yeah.
And then, like you said, then you can go straight then to a one-to-one that is very distressing because somebody's going through some real sort of trauma, and the skills you need are probably quite different from situation to situation. But, like you said, it's your role is to switch and
Yes.
be that person, what that
Yes.
person needs in that moment.
That's
Leave
right.
behind
Exactly.
move on quickly and
Yeah.
make that switch. So I think it's very interesting what you were saying. There's no sort of, you wouldn't call them disadvantages, but it's things that are difficult about the role.
Yeah, that's right.
That people should be aware of, and I think that's
Yes, yes.
absolutely right. And it's better to know those things
Oh, absolutely.
than just walk in and go, well, actually, I'm going to have the freedom to play
Prepare
play
any
guitar
curriculum, absolutely.
and teach some life skills
Yeah.
and do some art and then do a bit of maths. There is a very important part to it, which is deeper.
Absolutely. And as we were saying before, make sure you're aware of that if you are interested in making the switch. I think so that's probably one of the biggest aspects that I think people might not be aware of.
Absolutely. So just talk to people. To people and find out.
Yeah.
On that note, if anyone wants to talk to either of us about a role in specialist further education, we could talk much more about it. But we are sort of coming close to the end. So, Michael, any last kind of thoughts on? Did you have any other disadvantages?
Well, honestly, actually, the most, it's not exactly a disadvantage, but the worst thing is probably transport can be very frustrating.
Yes.
Because a lot of our learners take taxis in, and that can be organisationally that can be quite frustrating because we don't exactly control it.
Yes.
We're involved in it, and sometimes they miss sessions because of that. And that the whole process involving transport is quite convoluted. To organise it, set it up, and the amount of time it takes to organise it, and even then sometimes minor problems or mistakes happen, and that can be very annoying. And personally, trips to Japan are very expensive in the summer. So.
Because of course you're now bound by term
Exactly.
time only, and getting back to see family and friends must
and
be.
you only want to go for about 3 or 4 weeks minimum if you're going. To Japan,
going all that way. Well, it has been so interesting to talk through all your decision-making process. It's really been interesting. So we'll just, for the last couple of minutes. So I've got another weather update from our student Connor. So he has told us. So for anyone, it's probably relevant for anyone down south. So Tuesday is a gentle breeze. And I think light clouds, 21 degrees. Wednesday, we've got light clouds and a gentle breeze, 23 degrees. Friday, drizzle, but good for the garden. And then some light rain showers and a moderate breeze on Saturday. So thank you ever so much, Connor. Might have to make this a fortnightly thing where we get the weather from you. Thank you so much, Michael, for joining me as well. It's been a really interesting show. And as always, just love hearing about your journey, I guess, to us here. But thank you, everyone, for listening. If you're listening back, thank you so much for taking the time to come on and download. You can contact me through Twitter or Teachers Talk Radio. Like I said, if anyone's got any further questions or is perhaps considering a move, then we would both love to talk to you about it. I guess don't write off the other sectors. And thank you, everyone.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.